Most people think they understand the silver market. You buy coins, maybe some bars, maybe an ETF. And somewhere out there in a vault sits your silver. Simple. But the moment you step into London, into the world of the London Bullion Market Association, that assumption starts to fall apart, because in London, the question isn't how much silver exists. The real question is who actually owns it. Let's start with something that sounds simple, but isn't: allocated versus unallocated silver. Allocated silver is what most people think they own. Specific bars, serial numbers, held in custody, not on a bank's balance sheet. If you have allocated silver, the metal is yours, full stop. But that's not how most of the London market works. The majority of silver trading in London happens in unallocated accounts. And unallocated silver is fundamentally different. You don't own specific bars. You own a claim, a promise, an IOU from a bullion bank. That bank may have metal backing that claim. It may, but it may also be using that metal for lending, for trading, for hedging, for financing, which raises a very uncomfortable question. Is unallocated silver actually a commodity, or is it a credit instrument? Because if it's a credit instrument, then the LBMA isn't just a metals market. It starts to look a lot more like a fractional reserve system. Not identical to banking, but structurally similar. Multiple claims on a limited pool of underlying metal. Now, this is where things get controversial. Some argue there's plenty of silver. The system works because not everyone asks for delivery at once. Others argue that's exactly the point. The system depends on nobody asking. And here's where things get even murkier. Unlike something like the COMEX, London is largely an over-the-counter market. That means bilateral trades, limited transparency, no central order book, no real-time public position data. So when people talk about how much silver is in London, they are usually talking about vault holdings. But vault holdings don't tell you how much is already pledged, how much is rehypothecated, and how many claims exist per ounce. And that distinction matters because ownership is not the same as possession. And now let's take this one step further. If you hold unallocated silver, you are effectively an unsecured creditor of a bullion bank, not a secured owner of metal like maybe you thought. And that means stress. In a stress scenario, your outcome depends not just on silver prices, but on the balance sheet of the institution holding your claim. And this is where institutional investors will always push back. They say unallocated accounts are efficient. They provide liquidity. They reduce costs. They make the market function. And they're not wrong. Unallocated silver is the lubrication of the global bullion market. And without it, liquidity does collapse, spreads do widen, and trading does slow dramatically. But efficiency and ownership are not the same thing. And that's the tension at the heart of the LBMA system. Now, let's introduce another layer: rehypothecation. This is where the same underlying asset can support multiple financial claims. It's common in financial markets, but in silver, it creates a key ambiguity. How many times is the same ounce spoken for? To be clear, there is no widely agreed upon number. Some estimates suggest low multiples. Others suggest much higher. And importantly, the LBMA itself does not publish a claims per ounce metric. So you end up with two competing narratives. Narrative one, This is all a well-functioning market with adequate backing and professional risk management. Narrative 2. This is a leveraged system where paper claims vastly exceed physical metal. And here's the problem. Both narratives can appear true depending on the conditions. In normal market conditions, few participants demand physical delivery, positions net out, liquidity masks underlying structure, and everything works. But in stressed conditions, if more participants decide they want allocated metal instead of claims, then the system is forced to convert credit into physical, and that is where things get really interesting. Because conversion is not instantaneous. It depends on available, unencumbered inventory, willingness of counterparties, and pricing dynamics, and potentially premiums. And that is why some analysts argue the real stress signal in silver is not price, it's the spread between paper silver and physical deliverable metal. Now, let's connect this into a practical question. If you own silver through a financial product, what do you actually own? If it's fully allocated, you likely own metal. If it's unallocated, you likely own a claim. If it is an ETF, it depends on structure, counterparties, and redemption mechanisms. And this is where the debate becomes unavoidable. Because for some investors, that distinction does not matter. They are trading price exposure, not seeking delivery. But for others, especially those who view silver as money, insurance, or a systemic hedge, that distinction is everything. So we come back to the original question. Who actually owns London silver? Is it the investors holding allocated bars, the institutions with unallocated claims, the banks managing the system, or the counterparties behind those banks? The uncomfortable answer is ownership in London is layered. It is not binary. It is a spectrum of claims, titles, and exposures. And that makes the system incredibly efficient, but also incredibly complex. So here's the real takeaway. The LBMA silver market is not just a place where metal is stored and traded. It is a financial system built on top of metal. And like any financial system, it works perfectly until structure starts to matter. Now, the question I'll leave you with is this. If even a small percentage of participants decided they wanted allocated metal instead of claims, what happens next? Because that's not just a silver question, that is a system question. And now you know the rest of the who owns the London silver story. Build that stack. iBankerU. Good day.